Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. In Hebrew, our name is Bitronistim. IDSF is a leading Israeli organization advocating for strong national security to defend Israel. Thank you to all of our viewers. Thank you to all of our supporters for tuning into this briefing. It's a great pleasure to be joined today by former Ambassador to Israel, Yoram Ettinger. Yoram, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Now, the last times you've been on the briefing, you've been here in Israel, and now you're abroad representing Israel's security needs. And we thank you so much for all that you're doing. And I have to say that, you know, one of the unique features of these briefings is that I try not to just to talk with analysts and people who sit in the ivory tower all day, but really people in the field doing the work and understanding on the ground what is happening. So the fact that you're in DC right now, actually representing all that we're going to talk about is super important. So let's start off with the Israel-Hamas war has really highlighted certain capacities that Israel has and the ability to contribute to the U.S. national and homeland security needs. What can you share with us about that?
Well, the key issue to understand, I believe, is that there is a difference between the ongoing pressure on Israel by the State Department, especially State Department, also by the White House, on the one hand, and then the ongoing strategic cooperation between Israel and the U.S. Armed Services and the U.S. intelligence community and the U.S. Homeland security authorities. And this has been the routine actually from 1948. We tend to be alarmed by any form of pressure and resulting friction between the two administrations. And we should pay attention at the same time to the ongoing, very welcome relationship, welcome by the US when it comes to commercial and strategic cooperation, as is the case today. And to get the gist of what does it mean that Israel contributes to the U.S. national defense and U.S. economy, we can turn to the commercial high-tech industry. There are about 250 American high-tech giants which operate research and development centers in Israel, which has made them much more competitive in the global market and which has facilitated their rise to the top of the world as far as the level of their sophistication, technological sophistication. The same thing applies to Israel in the strategic or defense national security sphere. Israel has been, at least since 1967, and highlighted right now during this current war, Israel has been a research and development center for the US defense and aerospace industry, as well as for the US Armed Forces, US intelligence, and US Homeland Security agencies. We're talking about Israel being actually a battle-tested laboratory for the US military, US defense industry, as for instance, we were during COVID. You can call it the battle-tested laboratory for Pfizer. We employed the Pfizer vaccine, and for Pfizer, it was remarkably important to have Israel as the prime user, as the first substantial user, because we were the battle-tested laboratory for Pfizer, and we are the same thing for the US today in other areas. That's the reason, for instance, that FBI Director Chris Wray visited Israel on February 11 this year. He did not come to Israel to advise, to pressure, to guide. He came to Israel, according to his own pronouncements, to study How do we cope with that onslaught of horrific terrorism? Because according to the FBI director, FBI intelligence has suggested that October 7, 2023 is already inspiring Iranian-supported anti-American Islamic terrorist groups to carry out similar acts of terrorism against American targets, not only in the Persian Gulf, not only in the Middle East, Africa, or Asia, but on US soil. In fact, the FBI director repeated that alarm in 4 different hearings on Capitol Hill, 2 in the House, 2 in the Senate, repeating the notion that October 7 sounds the alarm as far as US Homeland Security. And visiting Israel, he consulted the Israeli authorities, his own colleagues, to find out how do we cope with that which could be around the corner also in the United States. In fact, the FBI director indicated that the FBI already apprehended number of terrorist cells financed, guided, manned by the Iranians, and mentioned that Iran is planning a series of murders of certain American officials. This is not the only type of visit. We have visits in Israel as we speak. By fighting against we are fighting against a terrorist state which is underground and overground, and we have been forced to develop certain innovative ways of fighting it. And we share those innovative means and ways with our American colleagues. In fact, American urban warfare experts have visited sites of training conducted by Israeli urban warfare. And the reason they do that is because for years, American urban warfare battle tactics have been based on the Israeli experience. There are different bases in the US specializing in urban warfare, and Israeli experts have erected special sites for them on the base in order to train in accordance again, in accordance of to the Israeli experience. That type of cooperation also has reached even the Air Force, although obviously we don't have any dogfights, but the intensity which we are using the American combat aircraft, F-15, F-16, F-35, in our war against Hamas terrorists, against Hezbollah terrorists, and against Iranian installations in Syria and all the way to Iran and all the way to Yemen. All those activities have yielded a lot of lessons, which once again, we do share with the Americans. One particular advantage to the US has been highlighted by a number of Air Force officers from CENTCOM, the American Central Command in the Persian Gulf. They came to Israel to observe how is Israel maintaining, repairing, and mostly overhauling the American engines of the American combat aircraft. And the reason they do that is because the most critical element of sustaining an effective Air Force is the effectiveness of overhauling the engines after so many hours, after so many miles. And again, the intensity that we have been using our own American-made aircraft has produced a number of innovative ways of overhauling the engine, which makes a difference between a combat aircraft which is effective or combat aircraft which has to be retired. And in fact, they have been impressed to a degree that more and more engines from the Persian Gulf are shipped to Israel to be overhauled due to the degree of the effectiveness that we have achieved. This, again, is not something new. It takes place right now. And the fact that we have very large number of American national security officials, military and civilians coming to Israel is basically a repeat of what happened after the War of 67, when some 25 US military experts came to Israel, studying the lessons of the 1967 war, studying the Soviet equipment which we captured, and came back after 3 months with heavy volumes. It was so productive for the defense industry and armed forces that after the War of 1973, they sent double the number, namely 50 experts came, and they stayed half a year, and they came back with much heavier volumes of lessons, which once again enhanced the performance of the defense industry and the armed forces. What I say is that the Israeli Air Force shares with the manufacturers on a daily basis very critical lessons, which are integrated as upgrades in the next generation of the F-15 and F-16 and F-35. It has saved the manufacturers between 10 and 20 years of research and development, which amounts to literally mega billion dollars saving due to the high cost of research and development in the context of combat aircraft. It has also enhanced, increases the exports of the American aerospace industry, and altogether it has expanded the employment base. Now we are using hundreds of such of American military systems. Most of them we're using right now on the battlefield. And as we use it on the battlefield and encountering problems, overcoming problems, each time it happens, right away, real time, we share it with the manufacturers, we share it with the relevant branch of the armed forces. Security and the defense industry communities in America, namely a mutually beneficial two-way street, just as it exists in the commercial area with those 250 American high-tech giants in Israel, just as it is when it comes to agriculture and irrigation.
We know you're there, even though we can't see you right now. Our viewers are eating up every word that you're sharing. And I have to say that every time that you come on the briefing, after the briefing, I have international relations professionals who say, wow, he was spot on with his entire analysis. You know, sometimes the masses, when they hear what you're saying, they're in disbelief about all of this. But every single time you're on, I get these lobbyists, these international relations people who say, wow, that is exactly what is happening and what we needed to hear. So thank you for sharing all of this with you. Did I cut you off? Are you gonna share more on that, on the benefits?
I hear you very well, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. You've clearly outlined the strengths and the benefits that Israel provides the commercial, the defense establishment community in the US. But on the geopolitical level, when you meet with policymakers, do they see Israel as an asset or a liability despite everything you've outlined?
Well, my visits to the U.S., Capitol, the Capitol building, Capitol Hill, House, and the Senate are limited to the legislature. I do not interact with the executive. What I can say is that for many years, there's been a very wide gap between the worldview of the State Department on the one hand and the worldview of most legislators on the other hand. And most legislators represent also most people in America, because when you examine the legislature, you come to the conclusion that the legislature is the most authentic representative of the American people. And there is a very substantial support for Israel. I don't ignore the recent erosion of support. I can only share with you the recent experience. This is today my third day on Capitol Hill. I started Monday. This is in fact the fourth day on Capitol Hill. And when it comes to the issue of Iran, which I believe is the most critical issue right now, because Iran is the head of the venomous octopus, which stretches its hands all over the globe, in fact, all the way into South America, Central America, and the US soil itself. And when it comes to Iran, there is increasing disenchantment among Democrats on the Hill, let alone Republicans, from the current policy, which is basically a diplomatic option, while the State Department has been addicted to negotiation with the Ayatollahs, diplomatic option, showering them with literally hundreds of billions of dollars, going back to February 1979, when the Ayatollahs took over control of Iran after toppling the pro-American Shah of Iran. Since that time, the State Department has embraced systematically the diplomatic option, disregarding the actual conduct by the Ayatollahs. Today, we have the State Department persisting in that, in a very feeble way, reacting to Iranian bombing of American installations in the Gulf and in Syria and Jordan. We see the US in a very frail manner encountering the Houthis' interruption of trade between Asia and the Western world. And the most legislators on the Hill are not in sync with such an attitude. And most legislators have reached the conclusion that the diplomatic option not only has failed, but has been immensely self-destructive from the American point of view, bolstering the anti-American drug trafficking, terrorism, money laundering, arms proliferation by Iran's Ayatollahs. And it's time to reassess the diplomatic option and consider the regime change option. And therefore, the number one issue on the Hill is very much tuned to messages coming out of Israel, as long as those messages highlight the American interest and highlight facts and not only opinion. There is another element which also I found open-mindedness on the Hill, and this is the one we just spoke a few minutes ago while the interruptions went on. And again, most members of the House and the Senate are not aware to the magnitude of the Israeli contribution to the US economy and US national security. They are aware that Israel is a very productive partner, but they don't know to which extent, and they welcome, Democrats and Republicans, they welcome any input into that context, which, by the way, is very important for those who are pro-Israel, because it provides them with information to counter constituents who claim, why give Israel $3.8 billion annually when we have so many needs at home? And it's true, there are many needs here in the US, but what the reality suggests is that this is not foreign aid. This is an American investment in Israel, which yields back to the American taxpayers a few 100% return on investment. And certainly those who are critical of Israel should be privy to that, to temper their criticism of Israel and hopefully change their position altogether. And the third issue, which I discuss on the Hill, in addition to the threat of Iran to the US and the benefits by Israel to the US, the third one is the issue, the proposed Palestinian state. And my focus, as I believe I shared with this forum a few months ago, what I do share with people on Capitol Hill and throughout the US is the fact, substantiated by documented precedents, that a Palestinian state on the mountain ridges of Judea and Samaria west of the river would be a death sentence to the pro-American Hashemite regime east of the river, which would transform Jordan into a paradise for anti-American Islamic terrorism, and very, very quickly would produce ripple effect, threatening every single pro-American Arab regime in the Persian Gulf and beyond.
Wow, thank you for that. I want to thank all of the viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing, either on our live Zoom, sending in questions, or on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, please consider subscribing and sharing this channel with all of your friends and family so we can continue getting the important word out. And I have no doubt that many of your viewers today, Yoram, are going to take your information and share it with their local representation, their policymakers. So let me ask you a quick question. We have just a few minutes left. And the question is, with what is now happening on the northern border in Israel with Hezbollah, and we're on the brink of potentially a much wider war, what would you say is the most important talking point for all of our viewers if they're going to approach their local senators, congressmen? What is the most critical talking point at this moment for them to share?
Well, while Israel fights its own war against Hezbollah terrorists, in fact, we are fighting a major proxy of Iran, which is a partner of Iran not only in the Middle East, but in fact has been a leading partner of Iran in Iran's entrenchment throughout Latin America, training Mexico drug cartels as far as car bombs, suicide bombers, and improvised explosive devices, which they urge the drug cartels to activate on the US soil itself. And therefore, Israel's war against Hezbollah, while obviously serving Israeli interests, is in fact a line of defense of the US and other Western democracies, and a victory for Israel would reduce the threat to the US and to other Western democracies. Any pressure on Israel to tone down our military pursuit of Hamas and of Hezbollah only works to intensify the threat, not only to Israel, but to every pro-American Arab regime and to the US itself.
Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, thank you so much for joining. Apologies with the tech issues and that we can't see your face for the second half of the briefing, but the content was well worth it. So thank you for taking from your busy schedule in DC to educate all of us. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing. We will be back with you Monday, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.